Hi, my name is Sean Olson. This lesson is about using the displacement tools in Wallworm to help you make more organic landscapes and be more effective at modeling your landscapes in 3ds Max. Now, there have been some other videos that I've done in the past. This is an updated video that shows you a lot more of the process and various design philosophies and tools. The way you create displacements in Wallworm is through Anvil, which is under the Level Design menu. When you open up Anvil, the main tab here is about displacements. You have three basic ways to create displacements. You can just create a displacement at helper, and the helper automatically appears at the world origin, and your first displacement will appear there. Turn off the grid to make it easier to see. And every time you click that button, that helper will be offset a little bit. So if I happen to move this helper somewhere else, the next displacement it creates will be there. And that's kind of how that works. And if you want to keep these on a grid, make it easier for that, you might set the grid and snap settings. If I click that button, the grid size will match the current size of the helper here. If I turn the grid back on, you'll see that it's at this size, and at this point it's convenient to snap your helper to the grid, which I can do by turning on snaps and moving this to a grid point. So the next displacement I were to create is going to be snapped to the grid at those points. Now that's the one way to create the displacements. There are other ways. Wallworm will also allow you to create displacements from planes. The planes have to be of a special dimension. Not special dimension, but a special set of length and width segments. They either have to be 4, 8, or 16. So if I were to create a plane at this, turn on edge facing here so you can see this. This one is 4 by 4, so that's a valid. And I could make another plane here, and then I could make another plane here. And if I have these all selected and choose faces to displacements, or convert planes, I mean, now those planes are converted to displacements. And finally, the other method is faces to displacements. And the way that works is you take an object in the scene, and let me give this some height and width segments here. And whatever the current face selection, and they have to be quads, of that object will be converted into displacements. So in this case, if I wanted to make a displacement from those, I'd have this selected and do faces to displacements. And you'll see that there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 displacements here. This faces to displacements function by default will take the texture, the material of the faces you selected for the texture of the displacement. This object had no material, so it just gave the default. I'm going to delete these, and now we're going to apply material to this object. So the top has the green and the sides have the brown. And now when we go to select this object, we're just going to do these three here, these four, and do faces to displacements. You'll see that the object, these displacements that appeared here, now have the materials that were from those faces. Now let's do some more interesting things here, and we're going to use this as the basis for our little terrain. And we're going to turn all of these quads into a displacement chunk. Now before I start here, I want to make sure that I don't have any polygons selected. So I'll go into polygon sub-element mode and make sure that there are no polygons selected, 0 polygons selected, and uncheck there. And then I'm just going to make sure that I have the right power that I want. In this case, I'm going to keep it at 2 to make it run faster. It takes longer to generate 3 and 4 and work with them. You can usually work with them fine, but generating them and exporting them takes a little bit longer, so I'm going to just stick with this for now. I'm going to click Faces to Displacements and let it run through. And now the displacements were created. I'm going to go ahead and hide my object that I used for creating this. And we're going to look here and see our displacements. So basically we've got this scenario where we're going to have some tunnels that go through the center of this thing. Each of these displacements can be edited independently by itself. In fact, you can go over here to the Modify panel and work on it at the vertex level if you want, do other things. And you'll notice if you go all the way down to the bottom, you have a bunch of these other options like displacements settings, like no physics interaction, no Hall collisions, etc. You can set the light map scale. You also have a bunch of other utilities. You also notice, if you're paying attention, that previously Wallworm made displacements that were triangulated. Now I've changed it to default to being quads. However, you can swap back and forth between triangulated displacement faces and quadrified. And you can always do that when you're selecting one of these. Click the Triangulate Me and it will show you the triangulated version, or Quadrify Me and it will go back to the quad version. I suggest you stay with the quad version as much as possible during the modeling phase. It just makes it easier. And if you're at a point where you need to worry about the display walkable, this function here, it works better when you're triangulated. So you can go back and forth. Notice the Quadrify function may not be available in versions of Max prior to 2012, so keep that in mind. Now there's a fundamental concept in Wallworm that's different than in Hammer with displacements, and that is Wallworm has objects that are called sculpt meshes. Basically, any group of displacements that you have that you want to work together as one object, you put them into a sculpt mesh. And you do that with the sculpt button here in Anvil. Now, this is important. If you have 0 or 1 sculpt or 1 displacement selected, 0 or 1, when you click this sculpt button, every single displacement in the scene will get added to the sculpt mesh. That may not be what you want, because it can take a long time to generate the sculpt mesh depending on how many displacements are in your scene and what the power of the displacements are, what the resolution of the mesh is. So you can, depending on how you want to work, pick areas of your project and create individual sculpt meshes. For example, I could just select these faces here and these ones right here and hit sculpt. Now this will take a moment, but it will create a sculpt mesh. And now these objects inside this sculpt mesh, I can treat them all as one object. Notice the other displacements are not part of the sculpt mesh, so if I start sculpting the edges of this mesh up, for example, if I start bringing this up, you'll notice that it's not sewed to the other displacements that were down there. I'm going to undo that. There are some functions in the newer displacements in the sculpt mesh. If you go down to the Modify tab, you'll see a button here that says Add Displacement. I can click this to add another displacement in the scene into this sculpt mesh that I already have here. So this allows you to expand what you're working on. If you want to keep this sculpt mesh but add other displacements to it, you click the Add Displacement and add the displacements to your mesh. And each one you add, though, will take a little bit longer to add because it has to recalculate the mapping between the sculpt mesh and the pieces, so it can take a while. Here's another fundamental thing you need to understand. The sculpt mesh itself, if you delete it at any point in time, everything you've done to it will be lost and it will revert back to the pieces that you had, unless you've committed the shape of the shape of the sculpt mesh. And you do that with this Commit Changes button. So let me demonstrate. if I go into vertex mode here, actually let's bring up the poly tools here, freeform, and let's relax this. And say I'm working on this cave entrance here and I really like it. If I go to export the level right now, it will not look like this. It will look like its default state because I have not committed it. You have to commit the changes to your sculpt mesh. Also, if I delete the sculpt mesh right now, the pieces reverted back to their state because I had not committed those changes. That's an important concept that you have to understand. So I'm going to create a sculpt mesh of this whole block here so that we can work in this as one object. So that took my computer about 20 or 30 seconds to create that. If you have more higher resolution meshes and more in your scene, you try to do that, that will take even longer, so it's something to be aware of. So I'm going to just demonstrate some of the concepts that we have in here. So I can add some modifiers to the modify panel if I want, as long as they don't change topology. You can never delete vertices, add or remove vertices, or add or remove faces. It will mess up your displacement. Don't do it. I like to use the freeform tools a lot in the later versions of Max to work with displacements. So again, we're sculpting this mesh here. And say you do something you like and you get it to where you kind of feel like it needs to be committed. At any point in time you want to make sure it's committed, you just hit commit changes. And it might take a second or two, but when you do that, those changes to the shape of this mesh are then sent to the underlying displacements. In fact, at this point, once you've created a sculpt mesh, you never actually have to revert it back to its pieces anymore. You can keep it in the sculpt mesh form forever, unless you want to change the actual textures on the individual pieces, in which case then you'll need to revert back to the pieces, change the material that's on the individual pieces, and then turn it back into a sculpt mesh. So when you're in a sculpt mesh, if you want to start painting the alpha, you notice that there's a button here that says paint alpha. If we turn that on, we can start painting the alpha of this material. And when we're done painting the alpha, you can do a couple things. One thing you can just do actually is just collapse the step. If you convert it to an editable poly, it'll go back down. And again, you'll still be at this sculpt mesh. So you can collapse this down to an editable poly and not worry about it. Go back down. You might start using some tools like noise. Of course, if this was a power 4 mesh, it would be a little bit more, the noise would be a little cooler. You can relax things, you know, back and forth. So one of the things that I really want to impress on people is how annoying this would be to do in Hammer. This would take a really long time to do this kind of stuff. So there's another thing. When I earlier said that it's better to keep it as quads when you're modeling, the reason you want to do things like that, we'll demonstrate it here. When you have a quadrified mesh, you have a lot of tools and shortcuts for selecting things that makes it a lot easier for working with your mesh. Say we wanted to create a rim around this whole thing here, and we wanted it to be right along that ledge there. We could select that all of those vertices easily, just like that. And then if I wanted to make it a soft selection, I could make sure that this goes out a little bit, so it goes up to that point here. And then I can just scale this out like this. And then I'll get rid of soft selection, and then I'll go back to my relax here. And then I'm just gonna smooth it out a little bit. But doing something like that in Hammer, you just can't do that kind of stuff easily. You can do anything in Hammer, it just is a lot more difficult and time consuming. And then again, another way to get to the paint is not only in the stack here, but you can also do the paint alpha by clicking this button, and it will then bring up the vertex paint tool, and all we're actually doing is painting to the vertex alpha channel of the object with the vertex paint tool. So again, there's a lot of workflows and things you can do with the way you can model in Max that makes everything way more convenient for doing just all kinds of sculpting of displacements. So we're going to use soft selection again here, and I'm going to make this fall off pretty far here, and I'm going to turn off snaps here, and let's just do something like this just to create an interesting different type of thing here. And we've got some stretching there, but that's fine. We're going to turn off soft selection, go out of here, and go back to our friend, the relax tool, and make him a lot larger here, and go around here and do some relaxing. It appears I selected some of the backside of this guy earlier, but that's okay. Actually, it's kind of interesting. Creates kind of a cave, a cooler cave effect. You might want to go ahead and play on that a little bit, and bring this down. We'll not be so far out on that up here. But go ahead and bring this down here a little bit. Come out and bring our relax again. And again, if I were using Power 4 displacements, this would be a little bit smoother, but that's not what we have right here. But you can still tell that it's pretty cool for developing this kind of stuff. And of course, we might actually, if we were making this for real, turn the stalactite up here that's hanging down into probably a model. So use this as a base for a model that we make that has a lot of detail. And there's other tools that allow you to work with things exactly how you want and create all kinds of different shapes, interesting things. But basically, your challenge as a person who's getting into using 3ds Max and Wallworm is really just becoming familiar with all of the tools you have available. That's really the challenge. It's not so much learning wallworm, I mean, there are tools in that wallworm provides, but one of the things people that are new into using 3ds and wallworm have to realize is you're really just learning. The value of wallworm is that it allows you to use 3ds Max specifically as your modeling application. And the opportunities you have to create really interesting things inside of 3ds Max for Source in a very efficient manner is really what it's all about. So let's talk about the opacity tool here for the Paint Alpha. If I wanted this to be, instead of just full bright changing to another thing here, I could actually click this and bring it down to a lighter thing, and you'll see that it's more subtle. And if I bring it down even lighter, it'll again be more subtle. And I want to go back and make this a lot more smooth. So here's our little environment that we created in a really quick amount of time. Again, I really challenge anyone to do something that fast like this. Just anything of this type of complexity or anything far beyond in this speed. Now I know that there are people that make really great things in Hammer, and it's not that you can't do things in Hammer, it just takes forever. And that's kind of the point here. So I was going to cover the display walkable inside of a displacement. Let's go down in here. And this is one of the reasons why you'll want to turn on the triangulation, is because when we do display walkable, it's always on the polygon quad faces instead of the tris. So you may not get a completely accurate representation of the walkable surfaces here. So you can click the triangulate me function, and now it will be more accurate. You'll see tris rather than quads being displayed as where you can walk and where you can't. But then when we want to go back to modeling, you want to go back to quadrify, and I think this might give you an example. If we go to just quadrify me, you'll see that it actually changed. There was a try here that is walkable, or two of them here. However, you can't see that when you're in the quadrified mode. Let me turn on edge faces so you can see here. So this is the triangulated mesh, and this is the accurate walkable surface. The quadrify me, still the same surface, but it will not display accurately. It'll give you an idea, but not 100% accurate where the walkable surface is. So that's why you can go back and forth between the triangulate me and quadrify, especially for the walkable surfaces, and always use the quadrify for modeling, for just good practices for the modeling things. So now that I have this all done kind of in an interesting way, I can commit these changes. Now until I click this commit changes button again, all of the underlying displacements are still in their original state. They haven't been committed yet. But when I click this, then it will be. So now if I export this scene, the displacements will all look like this. A couple last thoughts. By default at the moment, and it's been like this for a long time, this material is the one that's used for default placement of displacements. It's not really the best, but it's just what I've used, and I haven't got around to adding some new material. You can create your own displacement materials. You can also import all the ones from source. Doing the source way, what you'll want to do is use the material library generator, and I'm just going for blend materials here, and I'm going to import the nature, we call this nature, and I'm working in CSGO at the moment, so I'm going to call it nature CSGO, and actually I'm going to give it a blend, so it's only a blend, and I'll type in the word nature here like this and create my materials from the nature folder. Nope. That would be because I misspelled the word nature. Let's create, and it may take a couple minutes here. So it's telling me where I have created a material library. I'll close this, bring out my material editor here. I'm going to open up that library, and it's going to be a big library. I should have made it smaller, but oh well. You can make them smaller by giving more specific filters. But these are the materials, and I want to see these as large icons so I can see the materials more easily. So I found a couple materials that I might want to use, and I'm thinking about actually showing you how to mix and match and create your own material here. So in this material I kind of like the top one, and in this one I kind of like the bottom. So what I'm going to do here is bring this material over here to this. I'm going to right click and copy that bitmap. Make sure I know the name of this one. I want Rock Floor 02 to stay, and I want to paste that one into there. And now I have a new material, and I'm going to have to rename this material to and this would go into a folder named Wallworm and come out as a VMF called Custom Walls. And if you haven't noticed in the last several months, you can now actually add a bunch of these different properties that will translate into the VMF, and you could send it to source here, and I'm going to send this material like this. So that's how you can mix and match and create your own brand new materials from the source collection, or you can use your own bitmaps, and they're easily exportable through the interface. And now that we have this on here, we might do a little bit of more painting of the alpha, and I'm going to click this, and we might bring this up to black again and make our path in here a little bit easier to see. And of course that up there is now no longer valid because rocks probably aren't going to hang like that, but that's fine. Just trying to show you kind of how this works. So say we did this, there's one more thing, and that is because the underlying displacements do not have this material. I need to send that material to the underlying displacements, and that's why we have this button here that says send material to pieces. Now note that this whole displacement has one material, and this button will send that one material to all the displacements that make up this object. So in the event that you have a sculpt mesh that has multiple displacements that have their own multiple materials, you need to remember that, because when you do this, you're just sending that one material to those pieces. Again, I need to commit these changes because I changed the paint alpha. Whenever you do the painting the alpha, that also has to be committed to the underlying pieces. But now if we were to export this, we would be able to see it in source. Again, my name is Sean Olson. You can learn more about me at my website at seanolson.net, and you can always get the latest version of Wallworm at wallworm.com. Thank you, and have a good day.